Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. A very warm welcome to the Future City International Summit 2023, City Planning and Development. My name is Natalie, and I'm very honored to be your MC today. Organized by Million Home Charity Fund, the University of Hong Kong, and World Green Organization, the inaugural Future City International Summit aims to foster the urban planning and development of our city, promote regional urban development with the rest of our county, and also strengthen Hong Kong's position as one of the most livable cities in the future. And today we are very honored to have renowned planning and building experts from around the region to share with us their successful experiences. Now, before we kick off the program today, may we first now put our hands together to welcome Dr. William Yu, founder and CEO of the World Green Organization, to deliver his kick-off remarks for us. Dr. Yu, please.
Good morning. Let me first introduce myself. I'm Dr. William Yu, the CEO of World Green Organization, also the director of Million Home Charity Fund. So a very warm welcome to the Future City International Summit 2023, City Planning and Development. This summit is co-organized by three important organizations: Million Home Charity Fund, the University of Hong Kong, Department of Urban Planning and Design, and World Green Organization. So this is the first summit on city planning and design co-organized by these three organizations. Today we are so honored to have two heavyweighted government officials to support this event. Ms. Winnie Ho, JP Secretary for Housing. Thank you. And in the afternoon, we will have Mr. David Lam, JP Undersecretary for Development, Hong Kong SAR. So, okay, so let's talk about why we have to organize this important summit. As you may know, today some 56% of the world population, or 4.4 billion inhabitants, live in cities. So, the urban population will be more than double of its current size by 2050. So by that time, nearly 7 out of 10 people will live in cities. And also about our GDP, 80% of our global GDP generated in cities. So urbanization, to a certain extent, can contribute to sustainable growth through increased productivity and innovation, on condition that we manage it well and plan it well. So city consumes, on the other hand, you know, from an environmental perspective, over 65% of world's energy and account for more than 70% of global carbon emissions. So, as you can see, cities play an increasing important role in tackling climate change. But the exposure to climate impact, to all these disaster risks, also increase as our urbanization rate keep increasing. Some statistics for your reference: globally, 1.8 billion people, that is 1 in 4 people, live in high-risk flooding zones. Exposure is especially high in the densely populated area. How about developing countries? 89% of people are exposed to flooding due to rapidly urbanizing the river banks and all this coastline. So climate mitigation is heavily dependent on urban planning and our action. We need to support the cities in accelerating their green and digital transformation. So this transformation requires the involvement of local authorities. Today, we are honored to have many government officials and experts, citizens like you and me, business, investor, as well as the national and the international experts. So we have several world-class leader here. So we all expect a very meaningful dialogue today in this summit to cover how we are going to develop our city and plan our new areas in the future. We have an urgent need to build a, I would say, climate resilient city that supports our survival. Let me quote what the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said a few days ago. The era of global warming has ended, and the era of global boiling has arrived. You feel the heat? Not here, okay, aircon. So do you know July is set to be the hottest month on record? Record-breaking. You heard about the fable of boiling frog? Putting a frog in the boiling pot, it will jump out, right? But if you hit the pot very slowly, bit by bit, the frog will not notice until it boils to death. How many disasters, how many fatalities will record during these few years? We are in the hot pot now. Okay, we all love hot pot, but in the restaurant, okay? So finally, I want to take this opportunity to thank our important partner, the University of Urban Planning and Design, especially its department head, Professor He Shenjing, and her colleague, Dr. Clinton Connolly. Thank you. And also Professor He is traveling, so she asked me to send the greeting messages to you all, wishing this summit a big success. And also, I want to thank all the supporting organizations in alphabetical order, okay? The Bean Society, Hong Kong Green Building Council, Hong Kong Institute of Architects, the Hong Kong Institute of Circular Economy, Gas and Energy Division, the Hong Kong Institution of Engineers, the Hong Kong Institute of Landscape Architects, the Hong Kong Institute of Planners, the Hong Kong Institute of Surveyors. You know, we have lots of friends, okay? Yeah, continue to support us. And also all the generous sponsors. So finally, I want to take this opportunity to express my special gratitude to Mr. Daniel Guan, Chairman of Million Homes Charity. Yeah, without his generous support, both professional and financial, we will not have this meaningful summit, to happen today. So thank you, Mr. Guan. Hope you all enjoy today's summit. Let's work together to build a better and more climate resilient city. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yu. Please be seated. Next, please join me in welcoming Mr. Daniel Kwan, Chairman of the Million Home Charity Fund Limited, to proceed on stage to deliver his welcoming remarks. Mr. Kwan, please.
早晨各位 ，Good morning everyone， 你們好。首先唔好誤會我咩語言都識講，唔係幾識講嘢，請大家原諒。好，首先呢，我熱烈歡迎我哋尊敬嘅主禮嘉賓，香港特別行政區房屋局局長何永賢太平紳士。我哋亦都熱烈歡迎我哋尊敬嘅香港特別行政區發展局副局長林智文太平紳士，同埋以下各位尊敬嘅主講嘉賓。我哋有5位嚟自海外嘅專家，有新加坡嚟嘅劉太格博士，日本 日本早稻田大學嘅教授 Professor Miguel Esteban， 印尼嘅 Miss Monika Indriasari of Townland， 仲有深圳市城市規劃研究院院長司馬曉先生，仲有喺廣州嚟嘅聶危蕭工程師，跟住咧仲有兩位香港前特區政府嘅高層，前環境局局長黃錦星太平紳士，前規劃署署長淩家勤教授，仲有香港兩間大學嘅教授，香港大學李衞鋒博士，香港中文大學吳恩融教授，香港大學楊天人教授，香港中文大學伍美琴教授，以及市區重建局歐俊豪執行董事。此外咧，我哋更有幸得到本港各專業學會同眾多嘅熱心贊助人大力支持。由於時間關係，我唔逐一介紹啦。今日大家都本着熱愛香港嘅心情，有共同建設美好未來嘅熱誠，參與今日嘅會議。本人呢，代表我哋3個主辦單位熱烈歡迎大家蒞臨。對主禮人同埋各位演講嘉賓、各個贊助單位、在座各位朋友，我表示深深嘅謝意。今日國際論壇，何蒙特別行政區房屋局局長何永賢太平紳士在百忙中抽空蒞臨主禮，大會倍感榮寵。更蒙發展局副局長林智文太平紳士撥寵主持午餐演講，可見特區政府對呢次論壇嘅重視，同埋對香港未來城市規劃嘅高度關注。我哋邀請到嘅演講嘉賓有來自海外同埋國內嘅專家，更有香港知名大學各位教授各抒己見，必將能為香港嘅未來規劃同城市發展具有相當嘅參考價值。我熱切期待今日嘅論壇能夠順利舉辦成功。多謝各位。
唔該晒關先生，請就座。Thank you, Mr. Kwan. Please be seated. Our sincere thanks also goes to Million Home Charity Fund for their tremendous support to make this conference possible. And today we are also very honored to have the presence of Ms. Winnie Ho, JP, Secretary for Housing, HKSAR, as our guest of honor. So now please put our hands together to welcome Secretary Ho on stage to deliver a speech for us. Secretary Ho, please.
CEO William and Chairman Daniel, let us use Chairman's international style. My slide will be in more in Chinese, but my voiceover will be in English. Okay, I've chosen a topic, million homes. When I received the invitation of this occasion, there are two keywords, future city, million homes, and the Housing Bureau, Housing Authority did build million homes for Hong Kong. Let's watch this video. The Housing Authority started in year 1973. These are some of the early stage public housing that people in Hong Kong would be very familiar with. And throughout all the years, we are building homes, we are building communities in various places in Hong Kong, urban area, new territories, and moving into the 80s. New technology has also been explored. Many people has helped us in our committees. And we also have different forms of housing, like what we call the HOS, Home Ownership Scheme, going up. And this is the exciting time to draw the ballots for the HOS. And new technology has been introduced. And also new estate management skills and turning that into a professional knowledge. And this is the housing ladder that we've been building. Now, temporary housing, the transitional housing, and the light public housing. Together, we did provide millions homes for Hong Kong. Now, this is the housing ladder, starting from the rental housing on the left to what we call the green homes scheme, which is home subsidized flats at the discount rate for people who are in the rental flats to move up the ladder. And the next step up is our home ownership scheme going up, and the recently announced private subsidized sales flat, lock-in go. And next ladder up is the starter home, which is a discount of 80% of the private market value. So the top of the ladder is the private market. Now, million homes. This topic helps me to count how many homes I'm taking care of at the moment. For the public rental housing is 820,000 units. The green home scheme, 7,000. Home ownership scheme, 273,000. Altogether, we already have 1.1 million units. So I'm taking care of this 1.1 million units, and particularly the rental housing, the management, and the well-being in the estates. And in the future 10 years, I have enough land in hand to build another 360,000. And that is for the public housing, which includes the rental housing and the subsidized sales flats. On top of that, I'm already building 20,000 transitional housing, and by the year 2027 and 2026 and 27, I will build another 30,000 light public housing. All together, more than a million homes, 1.5 million homes. And new technology, because we have to build so many units in the coming 10 years, I have enough land in hand. Many people are still waiting for a public housing unit, so we have to build faster and better. I am very glad that recently I visited the Greater Bay Area, factories there. They are using the new MIC method. The MIC is definitely a greener and more environmentally friendly method in construction. It reduces construction waste, it reduces water, electricity, less nuisance, and less pollution on site. And look at the factory. When I go there, it was just like 2 weeks ago, the weather is hot. And as we walk along the factory, you can see the tidiness of the factory. And I don't sweat. The gentleman next to me don't sweat as we walk along because we have fans along the corridor fence in the factories. Once we walk outside to see the mock-up flat in the outdoor, immediately I can see his shirt all become wet. So changing the environment inside is really greatly improving the well-being of the construction worker, the safety, work efficiency, and quality. And the sharp light you see in the middle is the robotic arm. They are using the robotics in this factory production. Another topic that I'm very close to my heart is the well-being design guideline. We are building million homes, more than million homes. We are building new communities every time we complete a housing estate. So how to make them live happier, healthier in the housing estates are very important. I've just kicked off this well-being journey. We have a nicely designed van which will move around the housing estates in Hong Kong to collect people's view, what they like about their housing estate, what they want to improve in their housing estates, what are the key criteria that they consider very important for well-being. And all along, housing department colleagues have been using many techniques in their layout of the housing blocks, like the wind corridor study, microclimate, and making the housing greener, healthier, with a lot of environmental friendly measures, which the former Secretary for Environment have initiated, like the recycle shops and food waste collection points. So more better environment, a climate study. So this is a short video about our housing estate, the new technologies that is coming to our construction sites to help us build warmer, nicer homes.
房委會50週年，我哋繼續努力建屋建
繼續努力建屋建家。Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Ho, for walking us through Million Home project details. Please remain on stage. Now, we would also like to take this opportunity to express our sincere gratitude to our distinguished guests and speakers by presenting mementos to them. First, please welcome back on stage Mr. Daniel Kwan, Chairman of Million Home Charity Fund Limited, to come up on stage and present the memento for us to Secretary Ho. Mr. Kwan, please. Thank you, Secretary Ho and Mr. Kwan. Please remain on stage. Please remain on stage, because next we would like to invite our international speakers to come up on stage as well. First, may we welcome Dr. Liu Taiker. Dr. Liu, please. Thank you, Dr. Lee and Secretary Ho. Please remain on stage, and you may wait out towards the left of the stage for a group photo later on. Next, may we invite on stage Professor Miguel Esteban. Thank you, Professor Esteban. Please also move forward to the left of the stage for a group photo later. Next, may we welcome Ms. Monika Indriasari to come up on stage and receive the memento. Thank you, Ms. Indriasari. Please also move forward to the left of the stage for a group photo later. Next, may we welcome 聂卫萧女士，有请。谢谢聂女士，可以到台边等候校后的大合照。接下来有请司马晓先生，有请。Thank you. Please remain on stage. Would all the guests please come forward for a group photo together? 现在有请各位嘉宾来到台的中间，我们进行一张大合照。We would also like to invite Dr. William Yu to join this group photo together. Thank you everyone for your support. And would Secretary Ho, Mr. Kwan, and Dr. Yu please remain on stage, and our esteemed speakers please be seated. Our summit is made possible thanks to the greatest support from our supporting organizations. So now we would like to invite a representative to come up on stage. First, may we invite a representative from Beam Society Limited. Thank you. Please proceed to the left of the stage for our group photo together later on. Next, may we invite representative from Hong Kong Green Building Council Limited to come up on stage. And please put our hands together to welcome representative from Hong Kong Green Building Council Limited. Thank you. You may proceed to the left of the stage for a group photo later on. Next, may we invite representative from the Hong Kong Institute of Architects to come up on stage. Please also put our hands together to welcome representative from the Hong Kong Institute of Architects. Thank you. Next, may we invite representative from the Hong Kong Institute of Circular Economy to proceed to the stage. We will present the certificate to her later on. Next, may we invite representative from the Hong Kong Institute of Engineers Gas and Energy Division to proceed to the stage. And please also put our hands together to welcome representative from the Hong Kong Institute of Engineers Gas and Energy Division. Thank you. Next, please welcome representative from the Hong Kong Institute of Landscape Architects to come up on stage to receive the certificate. Please put our hands together to welcome representative from the Hong Kong Institute of Landscape Architects. Thank you very much. Coming up next, may we have representatives from the Hong Kong Institute of Planners to come up on stage and receive the certificate. So we will arrange the presentation of the certificate later on as well. Next up, may we invite representative from the Hong Kong Institute of Surveyors to come up on stage. Welcome. Thank you. And last but not least, may we invite architect Anna Kwong, MH, past president of the Hong Kong Institute of Architects, to proceed on the stage to receive the certificate. Architect Kwong, please. Thank you very much. May I also invite all the representatives on stage to come to the center for our group photo together. Once again, we would like to thank everyone for your support. And we are very happy to see everyone here at the summit today. We look forward to a fruitful discussion together throughout the summit. Thank you very much, everyone. Please be seated. And let's put our hands together to thank all of our supporting organizations, as well as our moderator later on for the panel discussion, Architect Anna Kwong, this morning. And thank you very much, everyone, for attending this event as well. It's a pleasure meeting everyone here. And I'm sure every one of us can't wait to hear from our expert speakers lined up for this morning. So let's begin with the first session today, which centers around international experience. So before we welcome the first speaker on stage, please allow me to introduce him to all of you. So our first speaker today is Dr. Liu Taiker, Moro's founding chairman, who is widely recognized as the architect of modern Singapore for his extensive contributions to the country's housing and urban landscape. Dr. Liu spent 24 years in Singapore's public service, serving as the chief architect and chief executive of the Housing Development Board, where he oversaw the development of 25 new towns and over 500,000 housing units. He also served as Singapore's chief planner and chief executive of the Urban Redevelopment Authority, where he led the agency in developing the 1991 Concept Master Plan, which till this day forms the backbone of Singapore's urbanization roadmap. So now, ladies and gentlemen, please put our hands together to welcome on stage Dr. Liu Taiker, Chairman of Moro Architects and Planners, who will be speaking to us about intelligent planning, Singapore experience. Dr. Liu, please.
Ladies and gentlemen. Okay, you can hear me better now? Okay, I am going to just talk about city planning in general and including a little bit of public housing, because I feel that urban planning, although every city has to do that, but it's not well understood what is urban planning. So I use the word intelligent planning because there's a tendency for urban plan to be just a piece of paper with some sexy looking images, but actually behind the urban plan, there's a lot of thoughts behind it. And that's why you have to use your brain to do the plan. That's why I use the word intelligent planning. And I'm just sharing with you my experience of 24 years in Singapore. Okay, let me continue. So this is just to make a comparison between Hong Kong and Singapore. Hong Kong is much, much bigger than Singapore, but population is just a little bit bigger. And so my company is called Moro, and we do urban planning, urban design, and architecture with a branch office in Shanghai. And since I left the government, I've worked in over 60 cities. And this is already introduced. I was in HTB, in URA, then I joined RSP, and at the same time, I served as the Center for Livable City Chairman and Singapore Corporation Enterprise as a board member. So my topic today is just the following 5 parts, very briefly. So let me just show you the transformation of Singapore. So what I find quite happy to tell you is that when the British left Singapore in 1960, our city was just full of squatters, but by 1985, there was no homeless people. And the central area was just a slum. That's how I remember as a child. But now, soon after, by 1985, it became a modern CBD. So I just want to emphasize that using intelligence to set government policies and to plan a city can help any city in the world to become world-class city in 25 years. So don't take it as a boastful statement. It's really a statement of encouragement. You need intelligent policies and intelligent planning. In fact, a lot of people give the credit of Singapore being today to me, and I don't accept it, because without Mr. Lee Kuan Yew and his colleagues, there was nothing I could have done. So political leadership is really very, very important. And just to give you a visual impression, in 1960, 3 out of 4 people lived in this kind of environment, 3 out of 4. But by 1985, this is my last public housing project before I left the government. I left HCB in 1989, but this was built around that time. So, and in terms of central area, as late as 1970, this is what the central area looked like, just a slum area. And 15 years later, it became this. And of course, I want to emphasize at the same time that despite the fact that we're a tiny island, all the buildings with a red roof are historical buildings that we kept. In fact, today there are a lot more than you see in this photograph. And because every city wants to have its unique character, and I often tell people that there are 3 unique characters to a city. One is density, one is natural environment, and one is historical buildings. You take care of these three, then I think you're on a good foundation to create a new unique city. And statistically speaking, say 1960 to 2020, our population grew by 3.4 times, density grew by 2.7 times. And what is, of course, rewarding to us was that our per capita GDP grew by 137 times. Because in 1960, Singapore was known to be more backward than Yangon, than Manila, than Ho Chi Minh City. So what I want to say is, again, I emphasize intelligent policy and planning can accelerate economic growth. So for example, in Singapore, by 2010, we already caught up with the US per capita GDP. It's not a boastful statement, it's just a word of encouragement that intelligent policy plus intelligent planning can make this difference. So, and what is important was that when I went back to Singapore, I was 31 years old, joining HDB, and I felt that no matter how poor we were, whatever we plan, including public housing, we must aim for a world-class standard. So, for example, the HDB housing, of course, is very cheap, but I insisted that the floor area must match something close to the USA standard in those days. Because if you did that, once it's built, and if the structure is very sound, which I insisted, then this building will last for centuries. And that is one way we actually minimize wastage of natural resources, is one way of contributing to lowering the contribution to global warming. So now how did we make this transformation so quickly? Again, it's intelligent policy and intelligent planning, but today I focus on planning. What is very important to my mind is that although we talk about planning, but what is a correct planning process? It is not, there's no common agreement, but I'm sharing with you, this is a diagram that we experience in Singapore. First of all, you must have a government policy for intelligent policy. Then you do the plan for the whole city long term. And then after that, you do urban design and urban renewal and so on. But then you have to put down all these things in planning parameters and also supported by what I call legislation actions, because there are a lot of things about improving of urban environment, which planners cannot do. You need a politician to pass different kinds of laws to do that. And if you have all these things in place, then you call tenders for land sale, then you build architecture, engineering work, and also build infrastructure. But infrastructure building must be related to urban planning. And then after that, then you can make various types of planning adjustments to keep up with the ages. But my view, I want to emphasize that the job of a planner is to understand the fundamental needs of people and land. And because now there's a popular belief that the world is changing so quickly, and therefore we should not plan city for long term. I totally don't agree with that. You must plan the city for long term, but what needs to be done is your governance. You have to keep adjusting the government rules to keep up with the ages. So in other words, this is to plan. Planning is to set the foundation for the city. And second is to build. That is, and the reason I emphasize the build is because cities are made of concrete and steel. So try not to believe that we should allow the city to keep changing, because you can't, because it's built of concrete and steel. In fact, to try to convince you, I want to say that in the future, the world will have 2 types of cities, only 2 types. Can you imagine what are the 2 types? One type, the cars drive on the left-hand side. Another type, the cars drive on the right-hand side. You totally cannot change that, okay? And that's because cities are built of concrete and steel. Now, what is changeable is the governance and the IT. The IT helps the improving the functioning of a city, help to minimize or lower the manpower costs of management of buildings and so on. So, but IT alone cannot change the city plan. So this is really, for today, is one of the important messages I want to convey. But the next thing that I want to say is that a city is not one body. A city is an urban family. And actually, I often speak rudely, impolitely to people in Beijing. I said, the problem of Beijing is that you treat the whole Beijing as one body, and you put the weight of 5 or 6 people on that one body. What kind of body is that? If you divide Beijing into 5 or 6 cities, put the weight on 5 or 6 bodies, every body will be very healthy body. So, but even in a smaller city like Singapore, below that you have region, you have new towns, you have neighborhoods, you have precinct, and so on. But how do you put all these ideas into a map? So this is the way I combine the various elements of the city, the family of the city, into an urban plan. So that's how I plan Singapore. Okay, so when you look at it, it's just a diagram, but behind that, there's a lot of thinking. Unfortunately, this idea is not well shared by too many people, and most of the city, just see whether you recognize the city that I show you. It's just a collection of projects. And this is the problem. And that's why, at my age, I'm still working, is because I'm trying to persuade more and more city planners, plan the city as a system, as a family, and not as a collection of projects. Now, how do I apply this? Because you need to practice what you preach. So I'm showing you how I practice what I just preached to you. So this is Master Plan of Singapore, and which I planned in 1991. I've divided into 5 regions. And so you look at the lower part, the central region, I divide them into new towns, and this is the new town plan. So even though it's just a tiny diagram, but every part of Singapore is planned with this kind of detail, okay? And then, but below the new town, you have, by the way, this is on the left-hand side, is a diagram of a new town. Every new town in Singapore planned by me follow this diagram. And then below that, you have the neighborhood with the neighborhood centers. And then below that, you have the precincts. So Singapore was planned like this. It's extremely boring, and yet it works. So as a planner, don't worry about doing boring things. So when you see this photograph, it's just people think it's just a concrete and brick, but behind that there's a lot of thinking that you don't realize. That's why nobody respect the importance of planning, but actually there's a lot of thinking behind it. And when you see this, in fact, I ask a lot of people, when you come to HCB Newtown, how many percent of the land do you think is used for public housing? I think most of them say 50, 60%. Well, actually, I only used 45% because the rest was actually for education and all kinds of facilities that you need for your daily life. So therefore, I just want to say that when we, as a planner, we don't, when I was in public housing, I did not build public housing. I actually planned communities. The word highly self-sufficient Newtown came from Europe, but actually you go to Europe, you can't find a highly self-sufficient Newtown because Europeans, although I am very grateful to them, they had the concept. They did not have the specification how to deliver. My job was to translate the concept into specification. So people ask me, how do you plan a city well? Of course, there are many, many things that you have to consider. Just now, for example, I said that the process of planning, from planning to urban design and so on, that's important. I go to a lot of cities, they don't follow that process. They just keep planning and go straight to architecture, go straight to infrastructure, go straight to engineering. Now that is creating chaos in a city. So actually, because of a shortage of time, I just tell you one thing. The most important thing is that a city will have to look at the function, is to have a scientist's heart and design the city, plan the city as a machine for living. Important thing is, if I tell you a city is a machine, all of you can understand. All the machine parts must be very precise. How many parts of machine, where to put the machine parts, and so as a machine designer, you must do that. Actually, as a city planner, it requires that kind of precision. I'm not just preaching, I did that exactly for Singapore. But then the question is, what is this machine designed for? For what purpose? Okay. The purpose to me is that you must have the humanist heart to design a machine to serve the need of people and land. It's not to serve sexy buildings, it's to serve the need of people and land. Because if you serve the people and land, you have happy citizens, you have highly functional land. That's important. But then, on the other hand, a city is not purely a machine. It has a function as machine, but it's also a work of art. And therefore, when you put this machine on the ground, you have to have the artist's eyes to romance with the land. Now, romancing with the land, it sounds pretty good, but in Mandarin, it's even more impressive. It's called 跟土地谈恋爱. Okay. Now, what are the benefits of doing that? That means when you do all these things, the city would have outer beauty like human being, but also inner beauty because it works well, and also spiritual beauty. When you have all these three kinds of beauty, the people who live there feel that they live in a beautiful city, a healthy city, and they have nostalgia for the city. These are some of the aspirations that I had, and I really hope that more planners around the world would share this kind of aspiration. And to do this, to turn the city into a machine for living, actually, when I was in URA, I did a wide range of things: planning, design, heritage conservation, polishing the regulation, enforcement, and also since our planning department's authority is so strong, I also encourage developers when they submit their plans for our approval to tell us, to give us suggestion on where the planning regulations or the planning land use can be improved. And actually, during my time, every 3 or 4 months, I actually got the government to gazette some amendments to our planning regulation and planning and the plan improvements. And that's through research. So the URA was my, I treat it as an urban laboratory, okay. Then the result is gratifying. You can see that, my master plan was done in 1991, and a planner must be a very patient person. Don't try to become famous overnight. It's only 15 years later, then we started getting the recognition. But the recognition is pretty impressive. It's way, way beyond my wildest dream. And even on the broader urban environmental accolades, it's also very gratifying to me. So mayors and planners, we must plan long term, and we must be very patient people and wait for gratification decades later. And now we talk a bit about public housing. The same thing. Public housing was my laboratory. I helped the government buy land, did the resettlement, create the building programming plan, and so on and so forth. And so I planned 20 new towns, each one around 200,000 people. And I actually helped the government develop 500,000 units myself under my charge. And again, through the feedback, because the beauty of doing everything, developing properties and property management is, to me, is a rare privilege, because when you manage properties, you get loads and loads of complaints. There are 2 ways to deal with complaint. One is to throw the complaint in the waste paper basket. I didn't do that. I organized research teams to sift through the complaints and got, frankly speaking, 99% of it is rubbish, but that 1% is gem. And then give me idea to improve my plan, design, and so on at the next round. And this is repeated 20 years. And that's how I learned a lot about urban planning. That is advertising, okay. And so that means I was in in government between 69 and 92, but in public housing between 69 and 89. You can see the curve shows the amount of the public housing building. The speed was faster during my time. And by 85, sorry, what we have achieved by 1985 is no more homeless, no more squatters, no ghettos, because we mixed the different income groups together, no ethnic enclaves, because we mixed the different races together, and 84% housed. And this is also a unique feature. Mr. Lee Kuan Yew pushed for home ownership, so 87% in public housing were homeowners. But actually, you talk about Singapore as a whole today, about 92% of the people are homeowners. It's a record unmatched anywhere in the world. And again, this is not self-praising. It's just to say intelligent policy plus intelligent planning can achieve this. And a lot of people would ask me, how useful is Singapore planning principle? I said, good planning principle is like the grammar of the language. If you master a language and a grammar, you can write any story of any length. If you master planning principle, you can plan any city of any size, of any culture. So just quickly, because I feel that I have this body of information I must share with as many people as possible. So that's how I continue to work today. And so in the last 31 years since I left the government, I actually have done a lot of planning from neighborhood all the way to, I use the word constellation city. It's actually mega city. But as I mentioned earlier, I want the mega city not to be treated as one city, but a collection of cities. It's like the planet in the sky. They are independent and yet they are related by gravity. And you can see in this chart that a large number of the projects are in China. I would say China has an advantage, a rare advantage. The government can push through any planning idea they want to. Two, the government owns the land. So if they want to develop, just take the land back. What they are missing is really good planning idea. That's how I got invited there a lot to do this. In fact, for this conference, I cannot stay long. This afternoon, I have to rush off to a Chinese city to talk about planning. And also, I did a wide variety of urban design. Okay. And I use the word urban planning and design. You cannot just do urban design without planning first. You must do both together. And also, actually, people ask me, which do I like better, architecture or planning? I said for my personal satisfaction, architecture I like better because you can see your final result in a few years. As a planner, first of all, you cannot see the final result in a few years. And second is by the time, I would say within a few months or a few years after you finish a project, the plan has been changed beyond recognition. You can't even see the result. But despite that, I insist that I will still, despite how painful it is, I will insist on doing the plan just to share the ideas with other people. So architecture is, and this is just a small confession that it's not that I like planning. I actually make use of planning for me to have free travel all around the world. And actually, I've traveled many times to Latin America, but at my own cost because I'm talking to some Latin American countries. I'm hoping that they will engage me. So in closing, urban planning is not yet taken seriously. That's why I'm talking not just to you, I'm talking to many people. Please, because if we are worried about global warming, about green environment, a good urban plan, intelligent urban plan is very, very important. Okay, and also good urban plan is a reflection of the urban civilization of your city. Let me explain to you in the next slide. You see, when you come to a city, you see the urban transformation on the island above the seawater. But nobody thinks about the fact that this urban transformation, below that, you have a good urban plan. But to have a good urban plan, you must have intelligent planning. But to do intelligent planning, you must have political leader to support you to do intelligent planning. If the political doesn't support you, I couldn't have done anything. I'm really deeply grateful to Mr. Lee Kuan Yew and his colleagues to give me the support I needed. So that's why urban transformation is really a reflection of the urban civilization of the city. And what is urban transformation? To help you remember easily, I say we plan a city for 7 E's. One is ecology must be healthy, environment must be functional and beautiful. Education is very important. If you want to have economic development, must be good. And economics, of course, will be prosperous. And equity is very important, is to give everybody equal chance to enjoy a benefit of a city. In fact, the words that used to be used almost on a daily, in every politician's speech in Singapore in early days was meritocracy. That means you give everybody a chance to improve himself. But these are kind of goals that most city leaders understand. But I want to emphasize that good urban planning has 2 other very important values, is esteem and earth. Esteem means if your city is planned well, the citizens in the city earn the unconditional respect from people around the world. That to me is very, very valuable. And second, of course, I believe that a good plan can slow down the urban warming. One example is a lot of people tell me that they come to Singapore, they don't experience serious traffic jam. Well, because if you don't have serious traffic jam, to travel the same distance, it takes less time, you burn less fuel, as simple. Traffic jam is really one of the main causes of global warming. But the reason there's no traffic jam is because a lot of people don't even need to use cars or trains. They just walk to the neighborhood center to do what they need to do. And if they need to use transportation, 85% of Singaporeans use the train and buses. Only a small amount use cars. So all these things contribute to reducing the contribution to global warming. So my wish for the city leaders is respect planning. It must be scientific and professional. Plan long term. Plan for the whole city, and follow this idea of city as a family, the hierarchy, and distribute the facilities hierarchically. And developers in a city, if you want to develop a city, follow the master plan. Hopefully it's a good master plan. But without a good master plan, sometimes when I work for developers, I will do the planning of the site in relation to the city first. And then after that, we know what will be the function here, which will help the developer make money, but at the same time, contribute to the function of a city. And then after that, then I start planning or start doing the architectural work. This is the end of my talk, but today my son is here, and he actually also under moral, we have a moral intelligence, is trying to, it's a bridge between policymakers and planners to understand what the city needs to do. So he asked me to just let you know he's here. And in closing, this is a painting by my father, 1967, of Singapore National Day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Liu, for walking us through the transformation of Singapore, which is achieved through intelligent policy and also intelligent planning. And I'm sure every one of us will agree that it is indeed a very insightful discussion. And next up, I would also like to introduce our next speaker, Professor Miguel Esteban, who will be speaking with us about the role of reclamation in urban planning. But before we invite Professor Esteban on stage, please also allow me to formally introduce him to every one of you. So Professor Miguel Esteban is currently professor at the Research Institute of Sustainable Future Society, Faculty of Civil and Environmental Engineering of Waseda University in Tokyo, Japan. He received his PhD in coastal engineering from Yokohama National University, and then he continued his work with the postdoctoral fellowships at the United Nations University Institute of Advanced Studies and at Kyoto University. He has authored around 150 journal papers on a variety of subjects. So now please put our hands together to welcome Professor Miguel Esteban, Faculty of Civil and Environmental Engineering of Waseda University, Japan, who will share with us about the role of reclamation in urban planning.
Okay. Thank you. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge that this presentation will have has a lot of co-authors. So this is many of my former students and other colleagues have contributed to this research through the years. I want to focus on land reclamation and how this can help cities in the future. And especially I want to look at also the issue of sea level rise, which is one of the challenges that humanity is facing. And what I'm going to be doing throughout most of this presentation is looking at how we can look at land subsidence to understand how adaptation will happen in the future. So how can we adapt? First of all, this is a graph that shows land subsidence in different cities in Asia. So as you can see, some areas of Tokyo have subsided by up to 5 meters in the course of the 20th century. Also Jakarta, as many of you will know, is sinking very quickly, but many other cities, Osaka, Niigata, Shanghai, Nagoya, etc. And some parts of Jakarta now are about 5 meters below below the original level. So one of our study sites in Jakarta is here in the north. We are studying this area called Pluit, and some areas of Pluit now are about 3 meters below sea level. This is actually a photo from 2007 during some of the floodings. You will see this small concrete dike is actually separating the sea from the land. Now this dike is much higher. Actually, this video was taken some years ago, so I haven't been back to Jakarta for 5 years, but you can see here, that is the sea. So all that's protecting the sea is that small dike, and now Jakarta's built another dike further out into the sea, essentially reclaiming out. So as I said, in that time, all that was protecting that area from being flooded is this thin concrete dike. But the same happened in Tokyo. Tokyo is a city that is at risk of suffering from typhoons. In 1917, large parts of the city were flooded by a typhoon. Boats were stranded, many people died, etc. And at present, what happens is that they build dikes at the borders of the rivers and land. And if these dikes were to be breached, well, there you can see the mean water level in yellow. So essentially, that convenience store would be flooded up to the first floor, and under high tide, even a bit higher. So the height of the present dikes is indicated on this pole. And in red, you can see the 1917 storm surge. What does it look like? Well, that's the river. And if you draw a line, you see that all this district would be flooded if that dike was to fail. So essentially, large areas of Tokyo are the same as the Netherlands, below sea level. So you can actually draw a comparison between Tokyo and Jakarta. You see in Tokyo, they started building this very thin concrete wall in the middle of the 20th century, the same as Jakarta that I showed you earlier. And if you go to Miami, they're doing exactly the same thing. They're building these little concrete walls. Then you start to elevate roads. In Jakarta, you see a road being elevated. If you go to Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam, they're doing exactly the same thing. They're elevating roads through the city. If you go to Miami, also here, you can see one of these slightly elevated roads. Then of course, at one point, when the land subsidence becomes high enough, what happens is that the water can no longer drain by gravity into the sea. This is a big problem. So in Tokyo, they started building water pumps. Jakarta, that's the water pump in Pluit. And in Miami, they also have water pumps for a slightly different reason, but following the same sequence. Of course, eventually you have to reinforce levees, you have to construct water gates to manage the flows of water. Here you see Tokyo and Jakarta. Eventually, you get into land reclamation. Cities are not abandoned, rather the opposite. They go out into the sea. So here you can see some land reclamation in Tokyo, which in this case is for a new park. The park is reclaimed out into the sea. And here you can see land reclamation in Jakarta. And eventually you get into even further. In Tokyo, you can create super levees. I'll show you slides about this later, and elevate entire districts. And I'm going to show you this. But this is Tokyo, Jakarta. If you go through the planet, you can actually see different examples in other areas. Maldives, in Male, the capital of the Maldives, is protected by a wall that covers the entire circumference of the island. And at one point, normally, when I give these presentations, somebody goes, well, what about these, what about these sinking islands, like Tuvalu or, that's not working. Okay. So I'm going to show you what they're planning to do in Tuvalu. And instead of me telling you, can you increase the volume?
So this little cartoon explains the reclamation side view. We could just put people on that reclamation and keep them safe, but we still have a lot of people that live in low-lying flood areas. So it's part of a staged approach where we hope to move people out of the most dangerous areas of the island and do a staged reclamation approach that turns the island into a safer location for long-term settlement over time. And that's a small concept picture there. That's just a screenshot of a video that shows a much more ambitious reclamation plan on Funafuti.
Me telling you, but actually Dr. Webb, who's one of the experts on reclamation on small islands in the Pacific. Actually, this is what they're planning to do in these Pacific islands that people are saying, these sinking islands, climate refugees, etc. The same thing is happening in America. Some cities in America are being flooded nowadays. They call it sunshine flooding. Essentially, during the high tides, some cities that are low-lying are getting flooded. It's only maybe to ankle level or so. But the first thing that they're doing, for example, in St. Augustine, they're installing these kind of valves to prevent water going in from the sea through the drainage systems, because actually one of the easiest way for water to get in is through the drainage systems. Another study site is in the Danajon Bank in the Philippines. These islands, because of an earthquake, they sank 1 meter, so now they get flooded at high tide. And what they're doing is, you see this little concrete path, essentially they're elevating the concrete paths through the islands. Miami Beach, as I showed you before, they're elevating areas and they're constructing little walls. But of course, one of the problems in the United States is that it's difficult for them to implement adequate land planning because everybody owns their property. So all the defenses are only as good as the person wanting to implement them. So there you can see a section of a wall, but next to it, the next property isn't protected. So actually water can get in. Manila, also they're installing pumps, building walls, etc. And Manila, they're also planning now to reclaim land and to elevate the level of this land. Ho Chi Minh City, because of flooding, because of sea level rise and land subsidence, you can see this pattern of they're elevating the roads, but in some areas they're also elevating the houses. And then you can see that different houses have entrances to different levels. So you can see the house in the middle. You have to go to you have to go up the house through a staircase because they built a house thinking already about how the road is going to be elevated. So it creates a very complicated urban landscape. And we did a study in Tokyo of how much all this is going to cost. So what happens if you have to elevate Tokyo? You would have to elevate the level of the dikes to compensate for sea level rise. So this has a cost to it. And of course, then you're going to have to elevate the port areas outside of these dikes. And again, this will cost quite a lot of money. So for places like Tokyo, the cost of adapting for sea level rise is actually quite expensive. We calculated it to be between 123 billion and 263 billion just in the extra materials, aside from the cost of rebuilding, and etc. And how would you do this? What is the technology? Well, in 2011 in Japan, there was a tsunami. Of course, this was caused by an earthquake. Because of the earthquake, the land sank. So what happened is in these port areas, they were of course destroyed by the tsunami. The water was flooding at high tide. What they did is, what I was explaining is just throw some gravel and resurface. And of course, this is all destroyed because of the tsunami. Another example of how, of land reclamation, if you want, that used to be a car park. They're just putting some material, any material they can find, and resurfacing. So this will have to be done in the future to compensate for sea level rise. How far can you go with all this? Well, because of this earthquake in 2011, hundreds of kilometers of the Japanese coastline were damaged. Now, what the Japanese did is they elevated the towns to, this is again, to protect against tsunamis. They elevated the towns by up to 15 meters in cases. So last night we were having dinner and I promised to show this photo. So here you can see at the bottom is the original level of the land, and at the top is the new level of the town. So this green area is by how much the town has been elevated, okay? And this has been done throughout entire towns in the coastline, towns of 30, 40, 50,000 people. Here you can see this all used to be a thriving town. Of course, it got erased by the tsunami, and all this is a construction, bird's eye image, because it's showing you all the construction, all the land reclamation actually going up. How did they do this? They used conveyor belts. In this case, this is Rikusen Takata. Here you can see the conveyor belts that they built from the mountains to the town. You can see this mountain here. They were chopping this mountain. This is not a bridge. It is a bridge, but it's a conveyor belt. It's taken material from the mountains to the town, and then it gets distributed through the system until eventually it's poured to increase the level, as I said, by 15 meters. And here I can show you a couple of videos of what it looks like. This is the old part of the town that they're going to preserve. Again, you can see how they chop in the mountain, the bridge. Over there, you can actually see some of the reclamation happening. And these are my students at the time, all of them probably not discussing what they're supposed to be discussing, but rather having a chat about something else. This is the only tree that survived the tsunami, so they've kept it as a memorial. And here you can see from a different angle, what you see over there is where the previous video is taken, so you can actually see a better image of the material that they're taking. That's my finger, actually. So actually, it's good that I'm pointing at things. And I think over there, as I go to the left, you can see, yes, where some of the material is being poured. But the conveyor belt goes throughout the town. So it pours material in different places. This is another area, and the main point here is to show you the cross-section. And this is another town. In this case, the edge of the town was, the height of the edge of the town was increased by over 10 meters, by about 10 meters. So this is Kirikiri town, and this is where I'm taking the photo. And of course, you can see over there, now it doesn't look like much because as years pass, it just looks like a normal town. But that is what happened. In Jakarta, the land is subsiding. So what they're doing is they're building, again, the same thing as I showed you. So you can see a concrete wall there, but this is a port. And in a port area, you can have a concrete wall protecting it. So in this case, this little concrete wall is protecting this surface of the port from being flooded during high tide. Now, of course, Jakarta continues to subside. This port is subsiding by 7-10 centimeters per year. They're spending 20% of their annual income on adaptation, on raising the level of the port. And what they do is they elevate section by section. So there you can see it, one of the older sections of the port that hasn't been elevated recently, and on the bottom you see one of the newer ones that's been recently elevated. The technology they use sheet piles, then they pour some soil on the side, and then they just pour some concrete on top. Here you can see one of the older sections of the port that hasn't been elevated yet. As you can see, you'll see some water is, of course, coming through. And the difference in elevation is because they've elevated that section of the container port. The engineers don't see any limit of how far they can go. They can continue doing this forever. They said, yes, we can continue pouring material and elevating. The government will ultimately have to pay. Of course, this is a tax on society. This is a different port, also in Jakarta. You can actually see the mangroves here. The mangroves seem to do quite well in compensating for sea level rise. The older dike that I showed you in some of the previous photos, and the newer dike being built outside, well, this was some years ago. All this used to be land, now it's flooded because of the sinking. And this concrete path, jetty, gets elevated periodically. So they're going through 12 centimeters of sea level rise. They raised it in 2002, then in 2012, every time by a few meters, by 1.1 or 1.5 meters. This is done sequentially, so they do different parts of the port at different times. Technology is the same, sheet piles, backfill, some concrete or asphalt on top. At one point, the engineers in this port say they don't see any limit, but maybe better to move to a floating port in the future. So, and the government will ultimately have to pay. Yet another port, fishing port, and this has been raised 3 times, 2006, 11, and 14. And here you see something very interesting. Here you see the pattern of adaptation. You see that this jetty has 3 sections. The one on the side here, that's a reclaimed area, by the way, so it's not, so people are actually advancing on the sea. You see the newer section, the one that they did before, and underwater is the one that they did earlier. So here you can see the sequence of adaptation to sea level rise in ports. And of course, the tetrapods are now underwater. And here they're using sheet piles on both sides, pouring backfill and then raising. Again, they don't see any problem of how far they can continue. They can do this even if 2, 3, 4 meters of sea level rise or land subsidence happens. But at which point is it not better to move to a floating port? And this is what they've already started to experiment with. So this is a floating, a floating area close next to the new concrete areas. This also happened in Japan as a consequence of land subsidence, as I explained before, in the 2011 earthquake. Of course, the technology that they have to use is a bit different to Jakarta. For the case of Japan, everything is dominated by, construction is always dominated by earthquakes. So it's a lot more expensive, and it's a lot more expensive because of this. They have to drive piles at the edge of the port to make sure that if there is an earthquake, the port area won't collapse into the sea. So this is incredibly expensive if you see how high these piles are, and these have to be done throughout the edge of the port if you want. However, Japanese engineers also say that they can continue doing this even if land would have subsided by another meter. After that, they start to say, well, it really becomes very expensive to drive these piles. Cost benefit, financial, and eventually, if they said after 2 to 4 meters, things get more complicated. And of course, we also tried to find out how much does all this cost, and we tried to get estimates from different ports of how much are they spending in all this. And of course, the costs are very different because it depends whether the cost in Tokyo is different to the cost in Jakarta. And the piling becomes very expensive for the case of Japan. So now I want to just touch on one question that was asked me about whether it's better to reclaim islands or to reclaim next to existing land. And I want to first explain, I'm not sure how many people know that all of Tokyo Bay is reclaimed. So starting from about 300 years ago, the Japanese have slowly reclaimed land all around Tokyo Bay. Here you can see it in different colors. Of course, in the 20th century, there's a lot more. Tokyo is a really big city, and this drives the need for land. So, as I was explaining earlier, a large part of Tokyo has a large part of Tokyo is below sea level. Here you can see all the blue area is actually below sea level because of the land subsidence that took place in the 20th century. You see the parts in green, closer to the sea, are actually reclaimed, recently reclaimed land. And they're in green because they are much higher. They've been reclaimed to a higher level to make sure that they are resilient against storm surges. Famously, Odaiba, here's a photo of Odaiba. is has been reclaimed using rubbish. They incinerate rubbish, and then they pour it into a certain area till it gets to a certain level. One person's rubbish is another person's resource. And this is something that it becomes quite important in land reclamation that I found. What else is Tokyo doing? They are, at the moment, because the land is below sea level, what they're doing is demolishing entire neighborhoods, pouring material behind it, and raising into what they call a super levee. So here you can see what the area looks like. And what they're going to do is demolish all those houses and rebuild everything on a much higher level. And this is costing a lot of money to Tokyo, but nevertheless, they're advancing, and they've completed about 120 kilometers along the rivers now. They're trying to speed up construction because of what happened in 2011. And of course, part of the reason is that in Tokyo, nobody wants to retreat from the sea. If anything, Tokyo continues to advance on the sea because of this need for space. It's a very big city, it's very densely populated, and the government is trying to go out. And I'll finish my presentation by going into this idea of where do you get all this material from. As I said, rubbish incineration. For the case of Tohoku in the north of Japan, they also use the material from new tunnels. When they excavate a new tunnel, they also use this to raise the level of the land. And sometimes in Japan, they have to dredge rivers in preparation for the next volcanic eruption. This is a subject we were talking about last night. So maybe some of you may know that there's a history of eruption of Mount Fuji. The last time Mount Fuji erupted was in 1707. It didn't cause so much damage to Tokyo, but there was a lot of ash that was deposited along the rivers. And this ash fall led to flooding. All this ash piled on the level of the river, so that when the water came, the water would have been much higher and flooded over the land. So the Japanese periodically dredged the rivers to make sure that next time a volcanic eruption happens, the rivers the ash will have some place to fall on until it can be removed. So then you can actually also use this. My conclusions, quickly, in 2 slides. People will not migrate because they're getting their feet wet. If any of you want, I brought a 3D documentary, a Google Oculus Quest headset, that I can show you some islands in the Philippines of how people are living with their feet wet, as I was showing you in the first slide, maybe. I don't think people are going to retreat from cities because of sea level rise alone. Certainly not big cities, maybe very small towns in the UK. Sometimes you hear this, but retroactive adaptation is sequential, as I was showing you. There is a sequence that you see in Tokyo, in Jakarta, you see it in Miami. But I think this is a bad idea. Maybe what we really need to be moving is towards more intelligent adaptation pathways. And I think the previous speaker did a very good job about highlighting how we really need to think about this intelligently rather than doing things retroactively, as what's happening in Tokyo or Jakarta. No significant barriers are identified by port authorities, engineers, and how you can do this. Jakarta and Tokyo have adapted to 4 meters of relative land subsidence. And if anything, people in Tokyo, Jakarta, and many of the cities are advancing on the sea. We are reclaiming outwards. So we really need to give serious consideration to coastal reclamation to compensate for sea level rise and make the cities more resilient against storm surges, etc. However, I always finish all my presentations by saying that I'm not saying everything is good. By far, this is not good. This is all very expensive. And unfortunately, you find that often the poorest communities are the ones that live in the areas most at danger. So there has to be a really big effort to think about how these people are going to be protected when land is reclaimed outwards. And yes, as I said, I didn't realize there was going to be so many people. I brought one of these Google headsets so I can show you one of the case study communities if anybody wants to see what one of these places looks like. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Esteban, for a very fruitful presentation on the role of reclamation in urban planning, illustrated by case studies in different cities in Japan and also Jakarta. Please be seated. And in the following presentation, our speaker will take us to Jakarta, Indonesia, to see how the city's future can be shaped. So now may I also formally introduce to you our next speaker, who is Ms. Monika Indriasari, who is currently working as a director at Townland's Jakarta office. She holds a bachelor degree in architecture and a master degree in urbanism from Technische University Delft, the Netherlands, and is certified as a regional and town planning expert with almost 20 years of professional experience. So now, without further ado, please welcome Ms. Monika Indriasari, Director, Landscape Architect, Urban Designer, Townland, and her topic today is Planning for the Future in Jakarta, Indonesia.
Thank you. Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Monika. I'm the director of Townland. I will brief you, introduce what Townland is. Actually, we are planning and design consultant founded in Hong Kong in 1985. So we have established our branch in Jakarta quite some time ago in 96, and we have also office in Shenzhen in 2002 and in Mumbai by 2008. During our establishment, more than 35 years, we have done more than 4,000 projects in more than 30 countries around the world. And our services is covering from different scale, urban regional planning, master planning, urban design, landscape architecture, and architecture. In Hong Kong, we have comprehensive development advisory services also for project management, policy formulation, and development standards, and social development. So basically, we are building new towns, business education, parks, TOD, commercial developments, and etc. And this is the topic that I would like to share with you today, is how actually the future cities will be in Indonesia, especially in Jakarta. A lot of terminology has been used recently, whether it's livable cities, sustainable cities, smart cities, resilient cities, and etc. But in Indonesia, cities covering more than 55% of national population. We have a population of almost 280 million people now, and more than 55% living in the cities, with approximately 60% of national GDP. So cities is very attractive for people to come in to make a better life. I think you have seen a previous presentation of Professor Miguel, and I would like to share the other side of Jakarta, which I think it correlates also with what Dr. Liu mentions about intelligent planning and how we in Townland have been trying to do reshaping our cities in Indonesia, especially in Jakarta, to make a different shape of the cities in what we are facing today. So for Greater Jakarta, actually I put the comparison of the area between Greater Jakarta to Hong Kong. So Hong Kong is around 43% area of Greater Jakarta, and we are populated by 31.5 million persons. So it is very dense. Basically, mostly because our 11% of Indonesian population is living in Jakarta. Greater Jakarta itself covers only less than 0.4% of Indonesian total area, but 11% of our population is living in Jakarta, makes it a very imbalanced growth. So everything in the past is concentrated mostly around Greater Jakarta. Greater Jakarta itself comprises of a lot of cities around it, and the development has been spreading to the south, to the Bogor area, to the Tangerang area, to the Bekasi area, to the eastern, while industrial townships is laying towards the West Java, and also to the northern coast of Jakarta. So Jakarta agglomeration itself, if we are concentrating about the network of circulation, we've been building a lot of transportation system, but I think Jakarta is one of the city that making use of MRT is quite late, because our first MRT line has been opened recently by 2018 by the coming of Asian Games. So currently we are building extension of the MRT line as well as LRT line and also high-speed rail train towards the West Java. So today I would like to share our experience in 3 townships with different scales. One of it situated in the northern coast of Jakarta, comprising of almost 1,000 hectare area. And the other one is on the eastern part of Jakarta, around 250 hectare area. And recently, we've been also involved in the 76 hectare area of a new townships at the southern part of Jakarta. And this is really how Dr. Liu just mentioned that we need an intelligent planning to change the shape of the city, to change the view of the city and how the city can be different in decades. So this is the first townships that I would like to share with you is Pantai Indah Kapuk 2, Y2, because this is actually the extension of the existing Pantai Indah Kapuk. It lays on the northern part of Jakarta, where Professor Miguel also just explained a lot about the sinking of the Jakarta city. So Townland has been involved in the development of Pantai Indah Kapuk 2 since 2013. So it is 1 decade ago that we start our initial conceptual master plan. You can see it on your right side. It's the first initial phase. At that time, the focus of the development is to provide a lot of landed housing with only a small portion of commercial core at the heart of the city. And the township itself is divided into 2 parts, northern part and southern parts, by the length of the existing river, where we then situated our green parks dividing the cities. And then in 2017, we are requested by the private sectors. By the way, this is the projects of private sectors, so not government bodies. Perhaps this is a bit different than what Dr. Liu mentioned in Singapore, because all is driven by the private sectors in Pantai Indah Kapuk 2. So at that time in 2017, 4 years after we finished our initial master plan, they came back to us because the market has been changes. So they would like to be a master developer now. So they are not selling houses to the end user anymore, but they would like to have a cooperation with the other private sectors developer to build the cities. And that's why you see that on the right side of the townships, they managed to sell around 100 hectare area of residential settlements already, but then they switch everything else to be a commercial components. And that's the majority of the land use by 2017. And we've been involved there as a revision of the master planner, as well as we managed to make urban design guidelines, landscape design guidelines also for the entire townships. Because these townships will not be ready in 1 or 2 years. It's still developing at this moment. It is like a very long-term projects of perhaps 30, 50 years from now. But if you see on your left side, now if we put our eyes in the Google Earth, now in 2023, some of our master plan has been implemented quite well, and I'll show you later how the situation currently is. So we can proudly say that we are not really pretty pictures planners or designers, but we make what we dream of for the cities to be reality in 2023 already. A bit of background of this location. So as I mentioned, that it's situated on the northern coast of Jakarta. Actually, it is part of the important component of Jakarta resiliency strategy related to Professor Miguel presentation recently. So it is actually the extension of Pantai Indah Kapuk 1, the existing townships already in Jakarta, but they expand their township towards the western part of northern coast of Jakarta. So currently we are also still developing another expansion of Pantai Indah Kapuk to more than 6,000 hectare on the western part of Peak 2. So in terms of accessibility to Jakarta city itself, the new townships can be achieved from central Jakarta 36 minutes if no traffic. I know if some of you have been experiencing the bad traffics in Jakarta, it can be worse. But normally it can be achieved by car in 36 minutes, by public transport 90 minutes, and by train by 60 minutes. And this new township will be related to the new LRT line connecting to the central city of Jakarta. And inside the township itself, it will have a BRT line which connects also to the Peak 2 feeder line later on. So a quick recap of what we have done here. So it's almost 1,000 hectare township development comprising of approximately 100 hectare of CBD area. And we managed to have around 60 hectare central park, green belt, at the center of the township, dividing northern part and the southern part of the townships. And on the eastern part of the townships, there is 4-kilometer wide sandy beach for public open space, and 3-kilometer perimeter mangrove that we preserve at the northern part of the townships. So currently, this all has been constructed on site. Flood mitigation system is one of the most important thing that has been thought because as also Professor Miguel mentioned in his presentation, Jakarta is sinking, so this area is part of the mitigation system also, and we allocate more than 7% of the townships for water bodies. Actually, it's for retention pond using Dutch polder system just to make sure that this flooding, this area will not be flooded in the future. And the main open space area, the 60 hectare green belt, has been also constructed. You can see that it has been used by a lot of cycles, joggers, pedestrians, and we have also 4-kilometer wide sandy beach where a lot of culinary area taken place, beach clubs, and also a mangrove of 3 kilometers on the northern part. And this is how the population of the city using the Central Park area currently 10-kilometer green belt, 5-kilometer waterway, and 6 kilometer of track around the main ring road. So with this master plan, it has been awarded quite a lot. In 2020, we had an award from Asia Property Awards Guru for Best Township Master Plan Design in Asia, and then Indonesia Property Awards also. And 2021 by FIAPSI Indonesia Ray Prix Excellence Awards for Gold Awards in Master Planning category, as well the recent awards by last year for Best Township Master Plan. And another townships that we would like also to share is on the other part of Jakarta. It's Sumarekon Bekasi, 250 hectare area situated along the eastern corridor connecting Jakarta to West Java, where the high-speed rail is currently under construction and almost finished actually. So for this township, we've been also involved at the very early stage, starting in 2009. As the master planner, and we've been involved in some of the site planning area for several residential cluster, as well as full landscape design of the overall main boulevard around Sumarekon Bekasi, until the construction monitoring of almost all landscape area. You can see also the cities is almost fully built. We start our master plan in 2009, and now in 2013, if we look at the Google Maps, a lot of things has been constructed as per our master plan. Of course, during the years that might be changing, especially as it is really a market-driven development. Some of it has been changes, but most of the framework that we put in 2009 has been done in constructed. For regional accessibility, reaching to these townships, there are some way. First is the light rail system, commuter lines, 90 minutes from the center of Jakarta. And if we go to this township by bus, it takes you around 105 minutes and around 1 hour by car. Some highlights of the master plan is actually 250 hectare township development. One important thing to be mentioned is that at that time, by 2009, there are no major commercial center around the area. So that's why the proportion of the commercial area is quite big. Usually in the master plan area in Indonesia, we allocate only between 10 to 15 hectare commercial area. But at that time, because we think that one of the key drivers for the master plan, the catalyst of the development is the commercial area. So we put approximately 30% of commercial area, combining it also with green open space and water bodies, mostly also for flood mitigation system. So this is how the townships is constructed now. In reality already, another important thing to mention also that it is important for a township development in Jakarta to work together also with the government, especially to make the township more accessible. So one of the trigger that we made at the time is for the private developers trying to lobby the government to make the direct toll access, direct exit from the toll road to the townships. And they have succeeded to open dedicated toll exit directly from the regional toll road coming to their townships, and it helps a lot in the township development as people doesn't need to make a long tour entering the townships. So this is a glimpse of some of the commercial area development where I just mentioned also is around 30% of the area. And this is also a flood mitigation system where we allocate around 9.3 hectare water bodies just to make also this area safe from flooding. And by using it also for public open space, jogging, cycling, and etc. And recently they built also a lot of culinary F&B commercial area around the water bodies. And this master plan has been also awarded since 2015 until 2019 as one of the best large-scale development projects in Indonesia. And this is the last project that I would like to share. Why it is quite important, because this is we designed just before the COVID pandemic period. And this is one of the very few projects which is launched just when the COVID started in March 2020. So if almost all development has been put on hold during the COVID, but specifically for Sanctuary Collection, which is situated on the southern part of Jakarta, our client insists to launch it, and surprisingly, it is quite a lot of success. Mostly because they take advantages of the location of the area where it is actually situated in the very close to nature area around the mountainous area on the southern part of Jakarta, where you have still a lot of very natural environment close to the mountains, along the river parts also, and we've been involved here since 2019 for full landscape design, also the extension of the master plan. So this area is also accessible from the central downtown Jakarta, around 60 minutes by LRT or 2 hours by commuter and by bus, and also around 1.5 hours by car. A little highlight of the master plan. So it's situated on the highlands next to a lot of river. So they take advantages. COVID situation changed the way we would like to live in the city. So people appreciate outdoor spaces more, and that's why I think one of the successful story behind this development is that we provide a lot of open space area around the cities for people to use. 24 hectare area residential area and 3 kilometer riverside promenade and more than 9% of public facilities. Currently, the first phase of development has been built. Basically, oh yeah, I forgot to mention that this is a joint venture projects between a Chinese developer, Singaporean developer, perennial Chinese developer, CNQC, and Indonesian developer. So it's actually a 3 GVs between international developers. So you can see also that the style of the architecture is very modern, and it blends in harmony with the very expansive greenery around it, and also integrated pedestrian network through the green open space as well as the hillside park. And you can clearly see the mountains view from your bedroom's windows. So this project has been also awarded with some of prominent Indonesia Property Awards in 2021. So as a conclusion for this presentation, I think for the future cities in Indonesia, especially in Jakarta, one of most important thing is to have an integrated mobility. You have integrated circulation system, networking system for vehicular as well as pedestrian as well as cycles. And then resilient and sustainability also plays an important role because like it or not, your townships, new townships around Jakarta will be attached to the city of Jakarta itself. And by the coming of the pandemic, the way people living is changes. People would like to be closer to the nature, so that's why you need to have allocate a lot of open space area and close to nature. And like it or not, in Indonesia, if you would like to make a good, livable, walkable cities, private sectors plays an important role because everything mostly driven by the market acceptability also. I think I would like to end my presentation this way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Indriasari. Please be seated. And thank you once again for sharing with us all the master plans for different parts in Jakarta. Coming up next, our speaker, Ms. Wei Xiaonie, will be introducing to us about Beating the Heat Guangzhou Cool City Plan. So Ms. Wei Xiaonie is the Senior Engineer at Guangzhou Urban Planning and Design Survey Research Institute. She has worked with the World Bank and the program Support Sustainable Cooling Strategy in Guangzhou since 2020. And today she will be joining us to share some valuable insights and experiences from this project with the topic Beating the Heat Guangzhou Cool City Plan. So please welcome Ms. Ne.
Well, hello everyone. It is a great honor to be invited to this summit. Today, my presentation will share with you the Guangzhou Cool City Plan that we worked with the World Bank. First, let's start with the climate change challenges. As we all know, the planet is getting warmer. As mentioned by Dr. William, this July we have just gone through the hottest month on record. And now we are witnessing more tense and frequent heat waves, and most significantly in cities where half of the world population lives and works. And the cities are heating up at twice the global average. And Guangzhou is one of the biggest cities on the Tropic of Cancer. So we have a typical subtropical monsoon climate, and the summer is very hot and long and wet. And with the impact of the urbanization and global warming, our city is getting hotter. In the past century, the mean temperature of the city has risen by 1.5 degrees centigrade, and roughly 1 degree of that increase was induced by the urban heat island. And meanwhile, the average wind speed in the cities has dropped about 30% over the past 20 years. So we can see from this land temperature surface map and also the wind simulation results that the urban heat islands and the low wind zones have been formed in the densely built urban center and expanded to the sub-centers. So excessive heat in city has adverse effects on environmental quality and public health, and the increasing demand for air conditioning only make the situation worse. At present, the air conditioning accounts for roughly 40% of the city's electricity consumption in summer. So we need immediate actions to cool the city down. So in 2020, Guangzhou was selected as the pilot city to carry out the China Sustainable Urban Cooling Project of the World Bank. And along with the project, the Guangzhou government has launched the Guangzhou Cool City Plan. So throughout the history, Guangzhou has developed many ways to live with the unique local climate. And to restoring this local uniques is a very highly efficient and cost-effective approach. So for the next part, I'd like to share with you some of Guangzhou's historical local solutions. So the Guangzhou's ancient city is built on the foot of the Yuexiu mountain and on the north of the Pearl River. So the mountains in the north can protect the city from the wind in winter, and the southeast, the sea breeze can help cool the city down. And you can see that the water system is connected to the Pearl River running along the city to provide cool and open spaces. And the road patterns follows the prevailing wind to channel airflow. And this traditional old village is more evident. This picture shows the Langtou old village in our city, and this village has the water ponds in the front and the houses in the back, and the parallel alleys shaped a comp-like shape that can bring the cool breeze from the waterfront to the back of the village. And the Guangzhou traditional buildings are in typical Lingnan architecture style, which have unique techniques in ventilation, insulation, and shading. And this courtyard, cool alley, and Townland gate are perfect examples of passive cooling measures. And the traditional arcade streets with the elevated ground floor can provide shaded and continuous walking distance out of sun ray and can facilitate the airflow with the widened street. And all the above are the passive cooling solutions in our history, which can be inherited in the modern context. So here's come to the part of how we explore and apply these sustainable urban cooling measures in our plan. And this is the framework. So this plan relies on a strong research basis to understand the heat and wind in the city. And we have developed the strategies in different levels and carried out 3 pilot projects. And based on that, we have transformed the experience to policy and technique tools and to provide support for other developments in the cities. And to understand the unique climate in the city, we try to exploit urban heat island by using the remote sensing method. And we started the relationship between the distribution of the urban heat island and the land use. And based on the data of 100 local meteorological stations, we used the WRF model to simulate the wind flow. And we explored the different wind field characteristics and identified areas that needs to be improved. And here comes our strategies in different levels. And combined with open spaces such as green areas, rivers, and roads, we developed wind corridor systems consisting of 6 main corridors, run parallel to the wind direction. So these corridors can maximize the air movement, the movement of the cool air from the mountains and the seas to the central area. And urban interventions and controls involving the building intensity, open space, and building width and the building orientations are in place for these ventilation corridors. And for the district level, we take into account the thermal load, the ventilation potential, and the distribution of population. And we identify the thermal vulnerability. Based on that, we divided the zoning units into 4 levels to regulate the thermal environment in the planning and management. And for the black level, we divided the cooling design guidelines for different types of areas, including residential, commercial, industrial, and historical blocks. And we also closely cooperated with the World Bank to stretch our work by conducting 3 different piloting projects, including one in urban regeneration project, and a new development project, and a local nature asset. So for each of the pilot projects, we engaged with the local government and the private developers and also the World Bank experts and other stakeholders to assess the effectiveness and the feasibility of those cooling options and then put them into actions. So we also conducted in-depth questionnaires and interviews to investigate the residents' heat preference and improvement needs. And here are the key findings. As the thermal sensation, over 80% of the respondents feel it's very hot outdoors in summer, and the indoor temperature, 80% of the residents think it's very hot. And air conditioning is in use for over 6 months a year and for over 8 hours per day. And for the living environment, the most demanding cooling measures come to the greenery and shading and ventilation. So in addition, we also conducted the thermal work experiments, collecting data on both subjective and objective of the thermal comfort and perceptions. And based on the data, we carried out detailed research to investigate the complex influence of how the built environment can affect people's thermal comfort and the urban microclimate conditions. So the first pilot project is Yongqing 5. This is an urban regeneration project with a focus on the block level and the market-driven mode. This project is located at the core of the historical urban areas, so we have determined 2 priorities. The one priority is the traditional passive cooling solutions, including the double-layer tile roof, the thin buildings, and also the flexible windows and gates. And another focus goes to the modern low-cost technologies, such as the cool roof, the misting fans, and etc. And taking into account the property ownership, microclimate conditions, and building characteristics, we finally decided 15 cooling sites covering 9 measures. And here are some implementation photos. The vertical green was installed on the west facade of the traditional architecture for insulation. And in the narrow alleys, the water misting fans and the cistern was built on the building facade to making great use of the limited space to greatly improve the thermal comfort of the pedestrians. And also the old trees were has been preserved and combined with the water features to create a cool and shady square for people to rest and connect and play. And multi-method of climate monitoring has been used to obtain long-term observation to support the validation of cooling measures. So according to the data, the temperature during the noon in the cool alley can be 2 to 3 degrees lower than other areas. And the second pilot project is the Knowledge City. And the Green Valley in the center was chosen to pilot and demonstrate the climate-responsive design. And for this project, our focus is to incorporate the sustainable urban cooling in the early planning stage and then effectively transmitting that into the construction phase. So this is the original plan of the Green Valley. We can see from the picture that the prevailing wind cannot access into the blocks, and the evenly building cannot maximize the shading area. So we run the solar and wind simulation to improve our design and made some evident changes. The natural pond in north has been preserved as the source of the cool breeze, and the park here, can't see the pointer. The park at the corner has been adjusted to a 9 open space along the main corridors. And also we arranged the waterfront buildings to channel the cool breeze from the river. And also we reduced the blockage of the buildings by breaking up the podium structures and using void decks and also setbacks. And also we used the canopies and the arcade and also the sheltered linkages to create a continuous working systems out of sun rain. And as a result, the ventilation efficiency and the shading of the buildings have been increased, and the highest temperature in summer has decreased by about 1 degree centigrade. So in the end, the proposal has been transformed into visual requirements on building height limits, dynamic interface, building form, and architectural setback. It has been included in the regulatory plan and passed on to the implementation stage. So we also implemented some measures and incentives in the knowledge city to encourage the sustainable cooling. Here are some examples. If you do 3D greening, that kind of greening can be included in the calculation of the green area ratio. And those kind of covered linkage with public functions can be excluded from the calculation of the building density. So the last pilot project is the hydro wetland. That wetland is only 3 kilometers away from the CBD, and it covers a total area of 11 square kilometers. And it is a great example of achieving sustainable cooling through nature-based solutions. And a series of protection and restoration actions have been implemented in this wetland, and the tidal process and the water flow has been restored, and the water areas has been increased by 50%, and the forest cover has been increased by 80%. So by the strong support of the World Bank and also the University of Stanford, we have used the INVEST model to assess the cooling effect of the wetland. And the results of the wetland can lower the average temperature of surrounding area by about 0.5 to 1 degree centigrade. And to promote citywide actions based on our piloting experience, we transformed our actions into policies. So the Guangzhou Urban Planning Bureau has issued a document. The document included 8 checking points to strengthen the sustainable cooling in the planning and permits review, the permits review process. So at the meantime, we also developed the urban cooling toolkits comprising of 15 toolbox under 5 categories. This file has been published on the World Bank website, and to promote the knowledge sharing with other cities around the world. So with all the above tries and works, we're looking for a cooler Guangzhou in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ne, for sharing with us all the cooling measures that have been put in place in Guangzhou. Please be seated. As we all know, the central government has put tremendous effort in fostering the development in the Greater Bay Area. And Hengqin in Zhuhai is one of the key zones that we must pay attention to. Our next speaker is going to speak to us about Hengqin's planning as a case study. 接下来的讲者是司马晓先生，现任深圳市城市规划设计研究院院长，首席规划师， 中国城市规划协会副会长、深圳市城市规划学会会长，享受国务院政府特殊津贴专家。请大家现在以热烈的掌声欢迎司马晓先生来到台上，跟我们分享横琴规划案例研究。有请。
把它打成全屏，因为我这边没有字的。看这个，打成全。好，尊敬的关主席、各位女士们、先生们，非常高兴有这样一个机会来到香港，和大家一起学习、交流、分享。那么我今天的这个题目呢是，介绍一下横琴规划的这个案例。那么，好，大家知道，这个接下来呢，我想从4个方面给大家介绍一下横琴的一个发展的背景现状，以及我们接下来的一些新时期的一些新的这个使命所面临着的规划的一些这个修订和规划的这个对策，以及未来的一个展望。好，大家知道我国现在区域发展区域协同是国家的一个重要战略。那么粤港澳大湾区是支撑我国高质量发展的第一个梯队和重要的动力。那么粤港澳大湾区经济实力区域竞争力已具备建成国际一流湾区和世界级城市群的基础条件。那么新时期呢，粤港澳大湾区将迈入全方位的协同发展阶段。为什么这么说呢？因为在近10年呢，大湾区呢在基础设施互联互通、科技创新投入产出、创新模式等方面取得了重要的进展。那么今后，将在政策制度的对接、规则衔接、社会治理和文化融合等方面进行全方位的协同。那么横琴前海、南沙是大湾区3个协同发展的重要的引擎，它各具特色也承担了不同的使命。那么今天因为我介绍横琴，那么我想强调一下横琴呢的作用即聚焦在发展促进澳门经济适度多元化的这样一个新产业方面，这是第一。第二呢，要健全澳门也就是粤澳地区共商共建共享的这样一个新体制。第三呢，要提升澳门和横琴的一体化的发展水平。那么接下来我简单介绍一下这个横琴的现状大家看到横琴与澳门呢是隔水相望是内地唯一与澳门陆桥相连接的之地，总的面积呢是106平方公里，其中陆域面积是86平方公里，建设用地约42平方公里。那么横琴和澳门呢是同宗同源相伴而生，同属我们广府文化下面的一个亚文化这样一个香山文化圈。那么它的空间演变呢过程呢是横琴和澳门呢 都是生于群岛，从岛屿到岛群，再发展成岛城。大家可以看到左下角这张图，第一阶段这个70年代之前基本上是一个自然的状态除了澳门半岛有一些建设，到了这个第2、第3阶段，那么开始才慢慢的建设，慢慢的建设。那么接下来呢，我简单这个说一下它的这样一个发展关系，从最早的各自的自由发展到我们横琴借力澳门的发展，再到我们现在当下正走入了协助澳门、助力澳门共同发展的这样一个新阶段。那么我们看看第一个阶段，回顾一下这个横琴的历史。大家可以看到右边这张图是1685年绘制的，后面呢基本上就是珠海右边呢澳门没有完全出现，前面4个岛就是左边呢就是小横琴岛，下面的就是大横琴岛，那边呢是右边呢是丹仔，再下面呢是路环3个岛。那么大小横琴呢处在我们这个海上丝绸之路的这样一个洋船的重要的锚地。16世纪澳门开埠，横琴呢其实还是一个沧海桑田。在这个时候呢7丘之城、10字水道、4岛分治的标志性图景呢已经被世界所认识这是在16、17世纪。那么在第2个阶段就开始了这个填海造地作为一些农业养殖所用。当时呢也是为了发展经济，所以说70年代到90年代期间呢珠海和澳门这个顺德的2地政府合作，在大小横琴中心沟呢开始了围垦，将大小横琴中心之间的这一块地呢填出了14平方公里的土地用于这个渔业和农业建设。那么到了现在这样一个新阶段也就是1992年南巡以后随着改革开放的深入横琴新区的设立、自贸区的设立以及澳门的回归以及2019年的粤港澳大湾区的这样一个战略的实施，横琴因为靠近澳门的这样一个先天的区域优势，战略地位呢不断的在提升经历了20余年的这样的一个快速发展期。那么大家可以看到，92年设立了经济开发区横琴，2009年提升为横琴新区，到了2015年，横琴呢又成为了自贸片区的这样一个政策高地。那么着重要介绍一下我们现在新阶段。新阶段呢是在怎样一个背景下呢？也就是粤港澳大湾区这样一个战略发展规划的背景下我们出台了横琴粤澳深度合作区的总体建设方案那么在2021年呢横琴粤澳深度合作区管理机构也正式挂牌。那么它赋予了横琴一个新的使命这样一个新的使命主要是促进澳门经济适度多元化的发展打造这样一个新平台便利澳门居民生活就业的新空间，丰富一国两制实践的新范式，推动粤港澳大湾区的建设的新平台。那么具体的措施呢，主要是在促进两地人才和产业的要素的集聚基础互联互通、文化旅游发展以及加强民生服务等方面推动秦澳的一体化，强化服务澳门的特征，促进澳门经济适度多元化大家知道澳门的体量比较小，所以说它的经济呢相对来说比较单一。那么我们希望为了可持续的发展能够更好的秦澳一体化发展，让它的产业 各方面能够更加的这个有韧性可持续的发展。那么在这样的一个情况下面呢，其实我们新的规划呢就构建了秦澳一体化发展建设的空间结构。那么主要呢是十字门延续澳门一河两岸的合作轴，天目河这个创新发展带衔接澳门知识这个产业的这样一个科技带。那么南部滨海地区呢与澳门共同打造建设南部山海河湾这样一个游戏圈。那么横琴总的来说它是北城北边是以城为主双十字的这样一个发展走廊，南边因为有大横琴山和这个海滨，那么它主要是与澳门共同这个构筑澳门南部的这样一个山海河湾的这样一个游戏圈。那么远景大家可以看到，最南端呢其实是有个填海，随着填海政策的这个批准远期呢这样一个填海能够共同和这个澳门横琴共同打造这样一个世界级的旅游目的地。那么在这样一个情况下，我们回顾一下我们横琴建设的现状。刚才说到横琴从1992年开始建设但是到了2022年差不多30年的建设总的来说不尽人意。总体规划在2020年要实现28万人口的居住，但是现在呢其实只有5万人不足我们规划的15%。但是土地的出让42平方公里的建设用地已经出让了17平方公里，占建设用地的40%。那么这个建设的这个现状呢，主要集中在这个北门的这个金龙岛、横琴口岸的这个片区，以及西侧少量的产业园区，还有呢就是大横琴山以南的生态功能开发了一些旅游度假的这样一个项目。那么大家可以看一下下面的这个照片也就是我们现在横琴左上角开发的相对成熟一点，其他地方总的来说开发的还是这个不是太多。那么对外联系方面呢，与澳门的连接其实也是比较薄弱的，也就是一个莲花口岸这个横琴口岸莲花大桥连通。那么还有澳门大学和这个横琴的澳门大学呢，它主要是不对外的，是一个无海关的这样一个通道。那么与珠海方向的衔接呢，只有2条大桥。那么与更广泛的珠三角区域粤港澳大桥珠海机场等联系呢，并不是特别方便。那么经济发展水平它的产业现状主要是在金融、房地产为主。那么产业园区内的企业集聚度不是很高，也特别缺乏龙头企业，产业带动的效益呢不是非常明显。那么在城市活力方面，大家可以看到这下面2张图。那么文化和消费的业态相对单一，城市活力不足。那么大家可以看到澳门这一块它的这个文化设施密度也好消费服务的多样性也好远远要大于我们横琴这个地区。在人口密度方面，大家可以看到澳门人口密度它这个红的这一块2个点一个是半岛，一个是蛋仔，大家可以看到人口密度比较高。但在横琴呢就相对来说密度比较低。那么还有呢，就是我们在城市风貌方面城市的肌理、尺度和建筑风貌差异特别大要做到同城化发展我们吸引更多的澳门生活、就业、旅游、居住到横琴的话，我个人觉得在风貌特色领域 不能有太大的这样的一个怎么讲呢？这个风格上的一个矛盾啊。那么接下来我简单做一个现状的小结。那么其实横琴具有临近澳门山海资源丰富、土地储备充足等优势，但是呢也存在着下列的一些突出问题。刚才说到了实体经济发展和就业不充分。接下来呢，我们要促进澳门产业多元化发展。第二呢，就是对澳门的服务支撑有限，那么要加强同城化的发展。第三呢，就是我们在城市风貌、城市特色、文化体验这个生态环境方面呢其实和澳门那边呢还是有很大的差距，有待提高。那么在这样的一个情况下面我们新一轮的规划有哪些对策呢？其实我们提出了核心的3大对策，一个就是产业多元促进繁荣；第二呢就是城市要建共生城市和共享家园；第三呢就是我们要绿色发展走可持续发展的道路。产业多元这一块呢我们希望构建粤港澳大湾区共享的创新圈，加强与区域范围内的产业协同，完善产业链条，增加创新动力，形成4+1+N 的产业体系，促进这个横琴产业的多元化这样的产业多元化，更多的呢是配合澳门的产业来更好的这个发展更好的发展。那么在科技研发和高端制造业方面我们这个有一个清单这当然是我们做了大量的研究基础上和澳门那边的这个产业和人才有所匹配的第二呢，在这个文旅会展商贸和现代金融方面，那么我们也列出了一些详细的产业清单，能够更好的利用澳门的一些优势和横琴的一些优势激发新的价值。第三呢，就是我们要针对澳门原有的中医药等澳门品牌工业怎么去增加科研转化设计加工和国际贸易这样的一个新的发展动能，让我们这个澳门的特色产业能够做得更好。那么在这样一个区域产业协同发展下面，那么我们在新的一轮规划中间的总体布局对产业进行了适度的优化。那么我们在这里构建了4条产业带也好，产业链也好，10字门产业带产业链呢，重点发展经贸和这个金融和商贸这个天目河这样一条带呢，为我们研究和转化作为主导的这样一个创新服务链。那么西部环线呢，主要是智能产业链布局科技和制造。那么南部的这个大横琴山脉主要是发展文旅和康养，和我们澳门共同来打造这样一条南部的这样一个环线。第二呢，就是我们要强调共生城市、共生家园共生城市、共生家园。那么在共生城市方面，我们主要集中在城市功能结构方面的这个对接交通基础设施方面的对接。那么在一线开放、二线管住这样一个新的监管体制下，实现粤港澳3地互联互通形成高铁这个城际、高速、港口、道路多维的交通网络，将粤港澳3地浓缩在半小时这样一个通行圈内那么还有呢，就是我们要参照澳门这样的一个新的市镇小的尺度的街坊和这个街区，我们打造了3级的生活圈 能够更好的和澳门的这些这个尺度方面的这个形态方面的进行更好的对接。那么还有一个呢，就是完善5级的住房体系提供这个5级的住房产品系列和空间，避免只考虑高端人群化完善阶梯化的住房体系，形成功能人口更加多元的城市。那么在共享家园方面呢，其实我们更多的是要这个塑造我们这样良好的这样一个高品质的环境和澳门呢环境呢能够比较好的能够对应起来并且呢补足这个生活服务设施这个大型文化设施澳门是缺少的，由于用地，那么我们在横琴安排。那么在横琴安排的一些生活服务设施，我们要延续小而美的澳门基因，设置微设施的这样一个邻里中心那么让多元文化能够融合共兴提升文化认同感和归属感。那么还有一点呢，就是多种文化耦合山水资源，塑造多样化的城市风貌。那么第三呢，就是我们的绿色低碳这一块，那么要构筑一个更广泛、更丰富的自然生态系统这个庇护万物生息，这个平衡开发建设和生态保育，在山田山水林田湾间呢，要留有这个生态廊道，强化湿地保护、保育等措施，巩固海岛的生态韧性。那么还有呢，就是刚才我们聂女士介绍到的在我们这样一个特殊的岭南气候条件下，我们要打造适应岭南气候特征的清凉城市我们通过风环境的模拟，进行了疏密有致的城市设计布局，引风入城，以风谷、风息、风建3级城市的风系统建设岭南气候适应性的城市。那么还有呢，就是构建山海城和谐共生的游戏网络。大家可以看到这张图我们有山有海有水这个自然资源非常丰富。在这样一个情况下面，我们海湾、水岸、山林溪流为骨架，塑造大美的城市建设一个立体多维、通山达海的宜于步行的慢行城市特色慢行系统呢，我们也包括岭南特色普澳风情的街道、大小横琴的郊野山径和连城道这个更好的打造这样一个慢生活城市。那么还有一点呢，就是我们现在前面几位教授专家说到的我们如何构建践行低碳碳中和理念的双碳先锋城市。那么构建这个碳中和的 EPD 核算体系，把横琴作为低碳科技的这样一个策源地和试验场特别是在我们南部的地区呢，能够增加碳汇网络，运用碳中和的材料技术，建造湿地系统和人工环境，打造大湾区的这样一个碳中和的示范区。好，最后呢，其实也就是一个小结。那么我想说横琴在跨入粤港深度合作区发展的新阶段找到新的发展驱动力是关键重大的政策机遇和基础设施推进将深度影响横琴。那么横琴也将在新的一轮规划指导下走向更加人性化、充满活力文化多元的发展阶段。这既需要促进两地规则深度衔接、要素跨境流动高效便捷、公共服务设施和社会保障体系一体化方面进行进一步的努力，同时也要在 产业和空间上保持多样性和弹性、灵活性，为将来的这个新的技术这个环境韧性对城市的影响保留足够的弹性。我相信呢，未来横琴将彰显一国资本两制之力的优越性和强大的生命力，成为践行一国两制的样板区。好，谢谢。
非常感谢司马晓先生的精彩分享，请就座。相信我们刚才从司马先生的分享里面也了解到更多关于秦澳一体化以及粤港澳互联互通的一些发展蓝图。So our speakers this morning have just brought us to different cities and regions for a deep dive into the city planning. So we have looked at the transformation in Singapore, the reclamation in Japan and also Jakarta, the future planning in Jakarta, the cooling plan in Guangzhou, and also the planning in Hengqin. And next up, I would like to invite our moderators and also different speakers to join us for a panel discussion. And we are very honored that our morning session speakers will be gathering together along with our moderator, who is architect Anna Kwong Sam Yi, MH, past president of the Hong Kong Institute of Architects, together to spark off some thought-provoking discussions on the city planning and also urban development in different cities. Our different professionals will also gather together to share their insights and also experiences from their past stories so that we can understand more about urban planning and development. Later on, we'll also be hearing from Dr. Liu, Professor Esteban, Ms. Indriasari, Ms. Ne, and also Mr. Sima Xiao. So ladies and gentlemen, please put our hands together to welcome on stage architect Anna Kwong Sam Yi, MH, past president, the Hong Kong Institute of Architects, and also joining her panel, we have our speakers, Dr. Liu Taiker, chairman, Moral Architects and Planners, Professor Miguel Esteban of Faculty of Civil and Environmental Engineering, Waseda University, Japan, Ms. Monika Indriasari, director, landscape architect, urban designer, Townland. Ms. Wei Xiaonie, senior engineer, Guangzhou Urban Planning and Design Survey Research Institute, and last but not least, 深圳市城市规划设计研究院院长、首席规划师司马晓先生。Now over to you, Architect Kwong.
Yes, good afternoon. I better take off my mask. Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I know that we are running out of time and everybody must be hungry stomach. So we will try to condense our panel discussion this time. But first of all, let me ask Dr. Liu my first questions. Yeah. Now, I like what you said is that the intelligence planning policies. Now, the intelligent planning policies is focused on functionality, which is very much my cup of tea. I always think that planning, is something that you must base on functionality and the basic needs of people. Yes. So can you elaborate a bit more on that one? Without the government support, just now you mentioned that you have the government support from Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. Yeah. So can you elaborate a bit more on that one?
Well, I think what's important is that I used to talk to Mr. Lee Kuan Yew when I was in the government, and he never once mentioned iconic buildings, never once, over a period of 15 years. Every time I talked to him, it was all about how to solve the human needs. And the human needs, of course, includes housing, employment, and for employment, you must have industry, you must have service industry, and also schools. So we have standard for schools. We have just standards for all kinds of human needs, including standards for how many playgrounds we must have, how many sports fields we must have in a new town. And he even went as far as telling us that we must provide sports facilities in the parks, because, to quote his own words, if you put sports facility in the parks for people of all ages, including older people, they will become so healthy that we don't have to build many hospitals and so on. So he was always thinking about how to meet the need of the people for employment, for health, for living, and so on. So, of course, his ideas coincided very much with what I believe a city planner should do. So, with his support, then I could do much better. But on top of that, actually, city plan to develop a city, we need a few other things. One is the government must have strong ability to push his plan. But in order to push a plan, you must have land to build. Now, Singapore is a democracy, it's not sociology. So land, when the British left Singapore, only 30% of the land was crown land, that means owned by the government. But now we have 80%. Now, this is a very important factor, because if you don't have land, how can you build all the infrastructures? But to do so, he introduced a series of laws to help us acquire the land. But if you just use a law to push the private landowner out of their homes, it's not going to work. So what he did was that before we acquire any piece of land, we must have a master plan approved by the government. And then this must be announced in the press to say, we're going to develop this thing on this piece of land, and then started to acquire the land from a private sector. And after we acquire, we never fail to deliver what we promised. So we got the support of the rest of the people, and therefore we could continue to acquire land.
Yeah.
So this was a lot of, so without all these things, I could have done nothing.
Thank you very much. And I think in Hong Kong, we are in a much different situations, because in Singapore, is it 30% are government land or 70% are government land?
3-0.
3-0,
When the
yes.
British left us.
Yeah,
Now
yeah.
it's 8-0.
Oh, I see. So that makes the difference.
But I
yes.
want to add
yes.
that he also mentioned that we should not go beyond 8-0, because we need to keep 20% in private ownership, so that through the private ownership, buying and selling,
Yes,
we
yes.
know the true market value. So
Yeah.
everything was thought through very carefully.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, that brings me to my second questions, which is targeted to Miguel and also Monika. Now, in Indonesia, and also in Indonesia especially, I know that there are a lot of these outlying islands, and also in Tokyo, not so much in Tokyo, but just now you mentioned in your PowerPoint that is it a reclaimed islands or next to existing land? So will you please, two of you, just give some comments on this? You have a lot of islands. In Singapore, you also have a few islands off the coast of Singapore, in the Marina Cove
Not
down
a
there,
few,
right?
We have 42 islands.
Yes, we have 42 islands, and the Singapore government, I know that is trying to make use of these islands also. Yes. So, Miguel, will you please just elaborate on, reclaim islands or next to existing land? Yes, Monika, yes.
Okay.
You have a lot of islands there in Indonesia.
Yes, we have more than 17,000 islands in Indonesia. So basically, Indonesia is very huge countries. You cannot really develop it by yourself, or the government needs really hands in hands with the private sectors, specifically because we need a lot of funding to develop all the islands. But in Indonesia, one of the reasons why sometimes we reclaim also islands, even though we have, I think, more than enough islands in the city, one of it is because of the flood mitigation systems, as just mentioned, as it surely need to be put everything safe, and it cannot be done alone by the government. And mostly in the Java Island or in the Greater Jakarta, the role of the private sectors is very significant to make sure that the poor and the rich can be settled quite good, and there is no social tensions in between them. And that's why you will see that in Miguel's presentations, there are a lot of different scenes than in what I just presented. And that's how it is, because the government deals with a lot more complicated issues, whether the private sectors also has other issues to handle, and the public or the market needs to respond it more positively.
And over to you, Miguel.
She knows better than me about Jakarta, so I'm not going to. I mean, for the issue of Tokyo, I mean, a lot of the land reclamation nowadays is the rubbish in Tokyo gets incinerated. You need a place to put what's left over from that incineration. So a lot of it goes into landfill, into the islands, and then you resurface and essentially build a new island, like build on top buildings and whatnot. It's slightly different.
Yes.
And also, perhaps I would like to add something. Like Singapore or in Tokyo, one of the reasons may be because they need more lands to develop. But we have plenty of land, empty land to be developed, and that's what one of the main reasons why the capital city is moving to the island of Borneo, because the inequality of the development needs to be well responded, so that not only development centralized in the central Java, but it is spreading all over Indonesia.
Yes, I've been to Jakarta, I've been to Tokyo, and I've been to Singapore. And I think, you know, in Tokyo and also in Jakarta, we are very much affected by the transportation. Always traffic jam in Jakarta and Tokyo also, you know, especially from the airport, you know, to the town center. It's really 1 hour, or sometimes it's in 1.5 hours, unless you take the Sky Rail. Now, my next two questions will be, because we are really running out of time, and we have our Mr. David Lam here already. Yes, welcome. Yes. So I will take a few minutes off your lunch time. Yes. So Wei Xiao, as I said, you know, I always call you Wei Xiao. Now, you're talking about the urban cooling system. Now, how's the progress, and any support from the government or any support from the participants, from the community, which is, I mean, on the cooling system, which is very good as far as I see. And if we are going to have cooling system, I think we are going to KS. I think we are going to have it also in the Northwest Metropolitans, right? So that will be something for discussion in the afternoon. So Wei Xiao, can you just update us on this one?
Sure. I think in area of the urban cooling, actually Hong Kong is years ahead of us. You know, Hong Kong started air ventilation assessment just a couple of years ago, and actually we are learning that experience now. And I think, yes, the government give us some supports, but we are still persuading them to do a lot more. Actually, we are, you know, the difficult and the challenge is to how to transfer the practice of the piloting sites to, you know, to standards or policies the city that can apply to the citywide. But you know, the standards and the process would be very difficult, and would take like 3 to 5 years to actually to achieve a standard. So we just you know, take a feedback. We just issued a document in the inner side of the planning institute, so that we asked them to do the to check the 8 points of the sustainable cooling in the daily review of the building permits, and we identified some strategic places that if you build, if you have projects in the areas, you need to run those meetings, that you have to invite the experts to check if you have reached the 8 points. So yes, that's what we're doing, and we would like to do more, that we can attend this you know, experience the citywide actions. Yeah.
Just one more question for you. Guangzhou is blessed with lesser attack from typhoon, right? You don't have typhoon so much, but in Hong Kong we do. You know, just in the past few weeks we have 2 or 3 typhoons, so that is much better.
Yeah, we had typhoon, but it's not that often. You know, we have Tianhougong, and actually there's a saying that Tianhogung will protect us from the typhoon. So every time the typhoon goes, it will, you know, turn around and go other places. Yeah.
Okay, Professor, the next questions will be from you, for you. Now, just now you mentioned about a connected network of the GBA cities and a shared service facility system. Yeah, which is, I think, what we are doing right now, because for Dr. Liu, Miguel, and Monica, you know, we are now very much focusing on the Greater Bay Area, which consists of 11 cities, and we are trying to form this into a hub. Yes. So how do you think your Wangqin experience, I'm sure, you know, your Wangqin experience will help in doing the planning for the GBA cities? So your experience will tell us something.
说我今天听了各位专家的意见以后，将来在横琴的规划建设中间，我们可以吸取一些什么新的一些理念，是吗？
对。
今天首先我是想说，确实这个前面几位专家的这个，因为我是最后一个发言的，前面几位专家的这个讲座我是受益匪浅受益匪浅。由于我们刘太格大师大前辈了在新加坡，在这个中国也有很多实践我们也经常有合作总结了很多这个城市这个规划怎么去促进更好的城市建设发展在初级阶段怎么更好的解决民生问题，在后面我们怎么高质量的去发展，再到后面我们怎么实现可持续的发展。我个人觉得确实我们的中国的这个30-40年的快速城市化，把很多国外100年、200年的这种城市化压缩在这个30-40年里头，我们的任务是非常艰巨的任务是非常艰巨的。所以说呢，我们在做规划，在城市发展的时候，确实就是说你要在很短的一个时间里头解决很多这个问题，我个人觉得有的时候并不现实我们不得不有轻重缓急轻重缓急。当然我们更好希望就是说所有的问题都在一个规划里头解决，但是我个人觉得这种可能性不大所以说呢，我们一般会结合国内的一些发展情况和国外已经刚才交流的这些经验我们会吸取过来怎么去融入到我们的规划中间去，但是它的力度不一定完全一样力度不一定因为每个中国的发展背景，比如我们现在 GDP 才1.4万人均新加坡都已经6万多了 对吧？香港是4万多，所以说呢，我想中国怎么讲呢？确实，一方面要更加的开放去学习先进的不管是西方的还有其他东方的先进的这个规划营城理念还更多的要结合我们自身的一些条件，这是第一。第二呢，我们确实要把近期和长远的这个目标要结合起来，比如我们双碳这个好像有的时候离我们好像很远。大家虽然说这个气候变化对这个我们的这个气温造成了影响，海平面上升，但是呢，其实有很多不同的见解。但是总的来说，我们会注重这一块就是但是它不一定是在我们规划建设过程中间最关注的。但是我们很清楚，我们要把这种理念不断的在规划中间强调，去跟发展商、去跟政府去跟其他的部门去强调这些理念我觉得中国做事情经常是由表及里，你们不要一开始觉得他在做表面文章，他其实做表面文章是为了慢慢去深入到实质去解决这样的一个问题。所以我今天觉得各位讲得非常好，我们也会在今后的规划建设过程中间慢慢的去吸收有轻重缓急的，最后大家共同去打造未来我们城市的宜居、宜街、宜商、宜游这样一个人类共同的家园，谢谢。
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sure there are lots of questions from the floor, but because we are running out of time, so I will just say thank you to all the speakers here. And then if you have further questions, I will welcome you to raise it up in the afternoon sessions. I do hope that in the afternoon sessions, we still have time for during the panel discussion sessions. We have 2 more panel discussion sessions this afternoon. So do come back at 2:30. Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the inspiring discussion. Thank you once again to our panel speakers, and also thank you very much, Architect Kwong, for moderating the sessions. You may now proceed to the stage and be seated. With that, ladies and gentlemen, we will now conclude the morning session and it's time for lunch break. Our afternoon session will begin at 2:30 p.m. So please be back at the venue at 2 p.m. We will be inspired by the latest modern urban planning trend in the afternoon, and we will have 2 panel discussions coming in the afternoon as well. So please return at 2 p.m. and we'll see you after lunch. Thank you.